Hello and welcome to the Car Camera Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2024 Toyota Sequoia TRD Pro. In today's video, we're going to check out the TRD Pro. We're going to talk about some technical stuff, take a look underneath it, take a look around it to see if the TRD Pro in the Toyota Sequoia is a good model or not, right after this. Let's start under the hood. So under the hood of the Sequoia TRD Pro, or actually all Sequoias, is one powertrain. They didn't give you multiple options. So you have the 1MHV hybrid system paired to the famous or infamous V35A FTS engine, 3.4 liter V6 twin turbo. Let's run through some of its mechanical construction, some of the stuff, and we'll talk about the hybrid system. So this is a V6 engine. Starting with the mechanical construction at the top, you have plastic valve covers, you have two-piece cylinder heads, roller rockers, hydraulic lifters, all the good stuff. You do have dual VVTi, variable valve timing. They are both oil controlled. You just have solenoid in the front. Very simple design there. The block is all aluminum. You do have the spiny or spinny liners that, if they are destroyed, you can't really do anything with them. The crank has bearings, which are very infamous. It does have a big cradle that comes at the bottom, and you don't have individual caps, you just have this one big cradle that comes up. This engine does have 4 timing chains. Yeah. One goes from both cams to the crank, and then there's 2 little ones that go between one gear of each bank to the next. That's a very familiar design we've seen with a lot of V6s from Toyota. And then at the very bottom, there's another timing chain that goes to the oil pump that sits a little bit to the side. For the most part, it's a basic design. All the timing chains will have an internal tensioner, hydraulic, except the oil pump one. It just have a little spring-loaded guide that puts tension on it. And that is a design they've also used in the past. The cooling system on this engine is pretty basic, actually. It does have a mechanical fan with a little solenoid that can engage it electronically. I don't know why they didn't just put an electric fan, for example. They didn't, and that's fine. They just wanted the roar of the fan to make it sound like a real truck, even though it is. So, fuel system here is a D4S system, super sophisticated from Toyota, and this is something that they do really well. And in case you're not familiar with what D4S is, they have 6 direct injectors and they have 6 port injectors. So they have basically the ability to do both. They either work one or the other, or they work together in different driving conditions. Now, this engine is twin turbocharged. So you have oil and coolant cooled turbos, one on each bank. And then you do have electronic wastegates, and it does have a liquid to air intercooler that sits all the way at the top of the engine, covering everything. Talk about that part in a bit. Let's talk about the hybrid system here. So this has a 1MHV or 1 motor hybrid vehicle. So you do have 1 electric motor instead of the 2 that we're accustomed to with hybrid Toyotas. So this motor sits between the engine and the transmission, and it does have a clutch. That clutch disengages the engine when needed. So here's how the operating modes are. If you are driving in electric mode, which, by the way, just a small note, you do not have EV button where you can engage it. It's actually a very short period of time that it will drive under EV mode. The clutch will disengage, the engine will be off. Now the engine is separated from the drivetrain. The motor will drive a torque converter and will drive a 10-speed automatic transmission that is very conventional automatic transmission, and that will drive the vehicle. When the engine needs to come on, battery depleted, you're demanding more power from it, that clutch will engage the motor, the electric motor that now is connected to the engine. It's going to start it up, and then they have the ability either to both drive the car as needed, or the engine will drive the car and the motor will idle. And then when the engine comes on, it's going to spin that electric motor and it'll be able to generate. So these are it's very interesting. It's not a full hybrid system, but it does give the engine a boost. Occasionally, the engine will shut off and you'll drive in EV mode. However, from our testing with this one, actually I own a 2024 Toyota Tundra hybrid that we've been kind of studying it slowly. It does give you EV range when you're cruising at a steady speed. All of a sudden the engine will shut off and you'll go in EV, but any hard acceleration, it'll immediately come on. Now this engine also has an electric starter, just a regular good old starter, in case, and in certain conditions, that's going to actually start the engine. But for the most part, in the regular operation, standard operation, you do have the electric motor start. Now, the hybrid system does consist of a few parts. We already talked about the motor and the clutch. That is actually a separate unit from the transmission in the engine. Does have its own valve body, does have its own fluid circuit and whatnot, because they don't want it connected to the transmission in case you're stopped, in case you need to start the engine, stop the engine, so that is separate. But driving all that and sending power here and taking power from there, which is kind of the brain of the operation, the converter with the inverter assembly that sits all the way on the passenger side of the engine bay. This is what takes power from the motor to charge the battery, sends power to it, sends power to the electric AC compressor. This does have an electric AC compressor. That inverter does need its own cooling system to cool it. So you do have another radiator, little reservoir on the side, an electric pump that cycles the coolant and keeps things cool. Having said that, let me talk to you about how the system works in the real world and kind of everything that I see here. The system works very good in the real world. This is actually not just from driving this for a week as a press car. This is from me owning one. I like how it works. It's pretty smooth. Does have its moments where it's buzzy, juddery, here and there. You feel like the hybrid system doesn't do a lot, especially the EV range. It is severely diminished. It's basically almost non-existent. The only time you'll really get EV mode is when you're coasting or kind of very light acceleration just to maintain a speed in perfect conditions. It's not hot, it's not cold, you're not going up a hill. Then you'll see EV range. Otherwise, it will mostly be engine driving. You will see the assist come on and off. In towing, and this is another thing with these are meant to tow. In towing conditions, when you put it in tow haul mode, it's actually gonna cancel out EV mode altogether. The engine will run continuously, but occasionally when you take off or you accelerate really hard, you'll notice a spike from the hybrid system trying to assist. And that is kind of its characteristic. For the most part, normal driving is pretty smooth. Occasionally, it'll have a little bit of a moment where it's taking its time to decide where we're going. But having said that, this is what I see here. Folks, everything component-wise looks very similar, very familiar. Everything is, you touch and feel all the plastics and everything, feel high quality. Couple things with this engine. It is extremely complicated. I mean, the V8 was complicated, it's big, and really access was bad, but it was not super mega complicated. This is very complicated, and service on this is gonna be difficult. I mean, as simple as changing spark plugs. Where are the spark plugs? You gotta kind of start looking. They're not obviously there. The intercooler sits on top, takes up a lot of space. The hybrid system has its inverter on the side, and they do have a little bit of plastic use for coolant here and there. I wish they would not. This is something that we're seeing Toyota use more and more. And another thing with this engine, for just because it wants to be cool, it has 2 air filters and 2 mass airflows. Kind of reminds me of a Toyota Century V12, but yeah, we have 2 air filters, because why not? The other thing is the intercooler radiators. They are separate. So you have one on this side and you have one on the other side. There is a lot of real estate in the front. That is just because you have the radiator for the hybrid system and the 2 radiators for the intercoolers, and then the main radiator and the condenser. There's a lot going on in the front, which makes this engine bay, even though it's a smaller engine, it feels extremely busy. And that's, I'll leave it at that, I suppose. Let's take a look underneath the Sequoia TRD Pro. First thing you notice, big shield with TRD on it. This is something we're expecting. But here's the, yeah, there's a small part. So these shields normally are a pain to carry for service, and they've always been that way. Here's small problem. So they put this little cutout here so you can loosen the bolts and slide it in the front. In the middle, they didn't. Okay, could remove those bolts. And then in the back, they didn't as well. So basically, what we're getting at here is this is pointless. We've seen in the Land Cruiser and some few other models, they put a big cutout next to it so you can loosen the bolts, slide the cover, and then bring it down. Then when you put it up, slide it. Here, they didn't exactly do it all the way. And then I don't know why we don't cover this. I mean, this is an off-road model. This is just going to get filled with rocks and mud and all kinds of stuff. If we're really going to use this for off-road, especially that my favorite one is this electric fan. That's just going to get plugged up with, and you go any serious off-road, it's going to completely get plugged up. And the other thing is, we are missing the recovery hooks again. Just like the Tundra, no recovery hooks. Fully purpose-built off-road model, no recovery hooks. That's okay, not the end of the world. Let's look at the front suspension. TRD sway bar, Fox shocks. This is a TRD Pro special, but I like that this is not new. This Sequoia has been out for a year or two here. I like that now they have a specific axle for the lifted trucks, and you can see it by the red color. This is a specific axle designed to work well at this steep angle. Because if you look at the angle of the axle, that's a pretty steep angle. So they started thinking of this stuff, because this is previously, when you lift these trucks with this style front diff, this is one of the weak points. But now I like that they're OEM working an axle in, and that is cool. Same thing with the upper control arm. Now they have a specific upper control arm, because that was another weak point of these. Suspension otherwise is lower control arm is the same. Pretty standard setup. If you've worked on one Sequoia, you kind of seen all of them, even the previous ones. They're very similar. Obviously not exactly the same, but very similar. Aluminum knuckle here. This is one of the changes for this new generation. It works. I just hope that bearing separates in the future, the similar metals and whatnot. 4-piston caliper in the front. This is exactly the same caliper, I feel like. I don't think anything changed, just looking at the stamping here. So Toyota loves to stamp lettering on their calipers. That's how they distinguish the different sizes for different models. And I see the exact same stamping, so I don't think anything changes. Maybe they just tweaked something. Moving on from that, engine's right here. Now, the nice thing about the V35 is drain plug is somewhere in this area. Oil filter is just up here, which means you do have to remove this cover. That's why I was saying if this cover had a slide service position, it would be nice. Moving away from that, this is the transmission. Now, the Sequoia is hybrid only, so it will always have, this is where the clutch is and the motor. You notice it has a separate drain plug, completely separate circuit, and then the transmission is right here. This is a pan for the transmission, which I like that is steel, so is this one. Very high quality, and I like that they're not plastic or anything. It does have a standpipe, has a single drain, and the fill is somewhere else, and this is actually where you check the transmission fluid as well. Moving away from that, transfer case. The biggest thing that we are proud of with this transfer case, finally Toyota, thank you very much, although Tacoma getting this would have been nice, you can replace the motor without disassembling the entire transfer case, which is something super silly with the previous models. But what is still kind of, I don't know why they do stuff like that, the plugs. These are one-time use. So every time you service your transfer case, you gotta replace the plugs because they have the special sealer on them. What was wrong with the drain plug and gasket? I don't know. These are the decisions that sometimes I wonder. Now, before we move on to the rest, we're gonna talk about they're supposed to be steps, but they're at the same time supposed to be rock sliders or however you want to call them. But just looking at these, in case you actually do take this off-road, don't assume that these are rock sliders because they are mounted to the body. This is not a strong point. If you want true rock sliders, they're supposed to be mounted to the frame to protect things. This is just a step, not a very good one because it's narrow. Moving away from that, the exhaust. So supposedly this has a TRD exhaust and it does sound the part, but I don't see it. Usually TRD exhaust used to be very high quality. This one just, it's not bad quality, but it's not truly special. It's just normal. It does have the drains. If you see this is actually water draining out of it. They do have a proper drain here. Same thing on the other side. That is normal, folks. That is not an exhaust leak. Now, look at the drive shaft here. I'm noticing a decline in the weld qualities and everything. This is a Spicer drive shaft. It is a single piece drive shaft. It's nice that it's single piece, but the welds could be nicer. This is the fuel tank, which is massive. I mean, I can't even extend my arms to reach it. It is massive, and that's how they put it on this side now. And the previous Sequoias used to be on this side because the hybrid battery takes up a little bit more space there. But something I wish they would do better. You have catalytic converters here. They are the secondaries, they're not the primary, but catalytic converter theft, although slightly calming down, thank God, but still, these are pretty exposed. Moving back here, if you are not familiar with the new Sequoia, one of the major changes is the rear end. Before, you used to have independent axles and CV joints, and you didn't have a proper rear end in the second gen. First gen, though, did have like an axle housing and whatnot. And this is actually better, because one thing about the previous Sequoia, it was way too complicated in the back. I mean, the suspension, you can't even see anything. Although they're reliable, they don't have a lot of issues, but still, this is a lot simpler. This is in the end a truck. This is proper. And I like that they used the exact same multi-arm to locate this rear diff. You do have your Fox shocks with the reservoirs on the side. Exactly the same setup here. Coil springs, just like the previous Sequoia, unlike the Tundra that got rid of the leaf springs for the new generation. Sequoia always had coil springs in the back. But rear brakes, single piston caliper with integrated parking brake. This is something of the change of the new generation. And spare tire underneath the truck with the chain that rattles. I still don't know what this chain exactly does. I don't think it does anything. But they didn't put a full-size spare tire, but it's still a pretty large 18-inch spare tire, which is good. This is the TRD exhaust, which doesn't if you looked at a previous TRD exhaust, you'll know what I mean. This just feels like a normal exhaust, which is fine, but it's going to be special. It really needs to be special. So something about the TRD model is the wheels and the tires. So these are Falcon Wild Peak AT3W, try and read the name here, 18-inch wheels. It's pretty cool, because this is what you want. You don't want some 21-inch wheel for off-road. You have a lot of tire here. These are specific BBS wheels. The TRD logo, by the way, is backwards. Just joking, because it says Pro here. You can just flip this, kind of like that. That's how it's supposed to be. In case you own one of these and this, now you've seen this and you realize that it says TRD Pro and it's upside down, don't blame the dealership. These turn. You can actually kind of just grab them at the right angle and they turn. It's just the center cap, which is another change from the previous. See, for the longest time, Toyota trucks would have a cap that sits here. They love to be stolen. Like a giant cap that goes all the way till here. This one is an actual center cap. I like that a lot. The other change is, we're slightly getting into previous gen to this one. This is a 6-lug design. It used to be a 5-lug design, which is pretty cool, because now these are 21 millimeter, not 22 millimeters like the previous one. Let's take a look at the outside and the inside of the Sequoia TRD Pro. Now, this is supposed to be, heavy emphasis on that, the off-road model. But there are some things that give a big question mark. The first one is the ground clearance is 9.1 inches. Now that is an improvement over the previous one, but the Tundra TRD Pro is 11.5. The Tacoma TRD Pro is 11.5. So why isn't this one 11.5? I don't know. Moving away from that, you do have the Heritage grille. You do have the light bar. This is actually a TRD light bar. The radar sensor moves down here, a little bit low actually, and this whole truck doesn't feel as high even though it's lifted. And we do have these lights that light up that say TRD, TRD, TRD 3 times. I'm going to repeat that 3 times. Now, the Sequoia, the rest of it, is very similar to the Tundra. Tundra came out first, then the Sequoia. Headlight is identical. Most of the body features are identical. This is also identical, and it does say TRD Pro. Now, you do have another light here. It also says TRD on it. They do get a little bit carried away with the badging. The TRD on the wheel, and then the Pro, as we talked about when we looked underneath it. That's the other part. But here's the thing. The flare arches. You're either going to love them or really not love them. Personally, I think I am in the I don't love them part. They are camo, and this, I guess they call it digital camo. It just looks strange. But here's the thing. This is well done. I own a Tundra, and mine is not a TRD Pro, so this is painted like gloss black. It's a horrendous paint. This is very nice. The finish on this is very nice, even though it's not my taste, but I have to say that. Large mirrors, which is nice. This is the step. I'm not going to call this a rock slider. It is not a rock slider because it's not attached to the frame. It is a step. Does say TRD, of course, and it is very small. This is not a super tall truck, and that have to be said, but if you're shorter, it's nice to have a step. This is not the widest step in the planet. So I feel like we didn't put a rock slider on the off-road model, and then we didn't put a big step to make it comfortable, so kind of half and half, I guess. Moving away from that, everything like from this area forward is very similar to the Tundra. Everything back is when things change. So this is a shorter wheelbase model, by a lot actually, from the Tundra. That's why the ride in this is completely different, even though they're essentially the same platform and the same everything. And that change in wheelbase makes a huge difference. That is the first thing. The second thing is, on the off-road side of things, having that shorter wheelbase means this is actually better to off-road in, because it has a shorter wheelbase, but it's still pretty big. Hope that makes sense. Same thing in the back. We do have the camo deal here, and you do have another reflector with TRD on it. You guessed it. But this is where I feel like they got to here, and that's when they're like, the rest will do. Because if you look at the back, it actually doesn't say TRD Pro here, other than the dual tips. It just says Sequoia, which I have 0 complaints about. That is perfectly fine. I don't think this car needs more badging. Now, a couple things with this. You can open the glass, which is really nice. They do have this style of window, that the window motor that we've seen before. They do have issues when this seizes in the future. Right now it's working, but that is one thing. And then close this, and then we open the whole thing. This is where we have a few issues. Before we get to them, let's talk about the doors. Dual motor on this one, and you see that the motor wire goes inside the back door, which is the style that is preferred. Same thing with this one. Motor also has a wire that goes in. Touch sensor on the outside. It's pretty cool. I wish they would put some lighting here for outside. That would have been nice. They did put some lighting here and the inside, one of them. But here's the part of the Sequoia that is, again, it depends. You either love it or you really don't love it. I don't love it. The shelf. So if you have little stuff that you're going to put here, the shelf will be great, because now you can divide stuff and all of that. But the problem is, folks that usually buy the Sequoia, they have a lot of stuff. It's usually big stuff. that's just going to be in the way. And now we have to start removing this stuff, putting it in the garage just so we can have the open space. Doesn't that go against the whole point of buying a Sequoia? That's the problem. Second problem we'll talk about when we get to the inside. But here's the thing with the buyer of a truck like this, and this goes away from the TRD Pro part, but even that, if we think about camping and whatnot, do you notice how high the third row seat is? That is the problem with this. Because the battery sits where it sits, the third row seat had to rise so much that this is the level of loading. If you remove this entire thing, we kind of still have the seat in our way. So you don't have a flat loading floor. And that's the problem. Moving away from that, third row is power in this particular one, which depends. See, this one got stuck on this already. It is power. It's nice to have it. And then when this one gets stuck on the... Do you see how this shelf is completely and absolutely in the way of everything? I mean, I'm sorry. You bought a Sequoia for its size. Otherwise, go buy a Highlander. Or better yet, buy a Tundra. Or a Tacoma. Or a 4Runner. Or a Land Cruiser. You bought this because it's big. This is not big. And now with the shelf here, it's even less big. That's the problem. This is where the problem starts. That's okay. Moving on. You do have lock and close, which is nice. Let's talk about something in the back. Kind of move away from the disaster with the Sequoia. Sorry, I had to say that. The license plate bulb. Why is there only one bulb? I don't know. That's the mysterious part. And then the other thing is, this looks very similar to the LX600, which is nice. It's a Lexus model. Sorry, I just can't get past the back part. Moving on, let's look at the inside. And this is where things get a little better. It is extremely excessive. Toyota's always done it this way. They really want to remind you that this is the TRD Pro model. You will never ever forget getting into this, that this is a TRD Pro model. First, it says it on the seat, then on the steering wheel and the shifter. And in case that was not enough to remind you you're in the TRD model, the start button as well. I feel like it's a little excessive, but hey, and the floor mats, of course, forgot to say that. This here feels exactly like a Tundra interior, which nothing wrong with it except the fact that these trucks are getting very expensive, and this is still very plasticky. Do notice this section that extends all the way across is nicer than the Tundra. I have to say that. But everything else is exactly the same, and it's a very functional interior. I actually love it for that part, but at these prices, this could be better material-wise. Little rattly stuff all over the place wise. That is one concern about this. Now, this does have a digital gauge. It's useful for the most part, but 2 gauges and a little screen would have done the same thing. Massive screen in the middle. It's actually nice. This is Toyota's latest infotainment system. It works. The latest update did definitely make it a little bit better. Still glitchy here and there, but hey, for how conservative Toyota is usually with their infotainment, this is actually a leap. So we'll go with that. But what I like about this is the rest of it is just manual control. All your HVAC controls are physical button. Now this knob for the radio, they're notorious to fall off on brakes, so be gentle with them. That's what I'm talking about with the interior. Could be nicer. Your four-wheel drive controls are right here. This also could be nicer. And some of your mode select, mountain, crawl control, they're all here. It was actually very smart how they integrated everything here. Brake hold is right there, your trailer control, your view. Everything is very easily accessible. This, of course, has brake controller, automatic brake controller, and manual controls are right there. It's a very comfortable seat. It does have the camo as well. Of course, they had to do that. At least when you sit down, you don't notice it, but I'm just not a big fan of it. Huge center console. I really like the center console. What I like more about it is let's have a little access if you just want to get something real quick. You don't have to open the whole thing. You do have a tiny little storage area here. You do have the charger, wireless charger right here. I think it's a good idea. You can put your phone there, you see it right in front of you. Somebody calls you or whatnot, or your passenger is using it. They can see their phone while it's being charged, which is nice. They do have the Toyota lettering written very large here. This is actually pretty nice touch. They don't overdo it, it's nice, but TRD badging is a little bit all over the place. Let's move on to the second row seat. Second row seat. I'm 5'7". This is my driving position. I just set it up as such. It's very comfortable here. You have your own HVAC controls. You have a household power outlet with some USB-C and USB-A. This is a very comfortable second row seat. It is a captain's chair, which I love for families because your kids now can go in the third row without having fold seats and whatnot. But then we get to the elephant in the room. Now here's where we get to the problem. This is where the problem kind of starts and gets worse. Look at the area between the seats. Do you see how high this is? If you look at the previous Sequoia, this is a lot deeper than this, not this high. And the reason this is so high, the hybrid battery lives here. So when we move our attention to the, which this actually folds like that, because they're trying to maximize the floor. When we move to the third row seat, this is how I have to sit in my Sequoia. I'm sorry, the Grand Highlander feels better than this. That's the problem. I feel like this is the biggest disappointment in the Sequoia. Regardless of TRD Pro, they're all like that. Because of the high floor, you can't really sit comfortable. This is not a comfortable spot. I feel like I'm sitting on a little tire on the floor. That's literally how this feels like. It is roomy this way, of course, but the floor is too high. And then if you raise the seat, you don't actually have a lot of headroom. I'm 5'7", folks. I'm short. I don't have a lot of headroom. So the whole point of buying a Sequoia is slowly fading away. That's the biggest problem with this. This is where I'm disappointed. But moving past that, you do have some sunshades here, which is nice. You can move the back, front and back, same thing on this side. But so they gave you some amenities, not everything. You do have some vents on the roof as well, which is nice. But the biggest problem is the floor is too high. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the TRD Pro Sequoia. Most of my concerns are actually with the Sequoia itself, not with the TRD Pro. I like the TRD Pro model with the exception of one thing. Let's get it out of the way and move on with the Sequoia stuff. The ground clearance is less than the Tundra and less than the Tacoma. I mean, it's a TRD Pro model. I wish they were similar. That would be nice. But I also understand that comparing Tundra and Tacoma directly to the Sequoia is a lower truck as it is meant for families and, regular use, not really utilitarian use. Having said that, the Sequoia itself has one thing that is the biggest thing. The rest is small stuff. The third row seat. They put the battery right underneath the back seat. Just fine. That's how the Tundra is, and the Tundra doesn't seem to be affected by that. But this, having that high floor underneath the second row and a little bit extending past it in the back, makes the floor for the third row seat extremely high. And sitting in the third row seat, the seat itself, is not a comfortable thing for adults. I mean, the whole point of buying a Sequoia is having that beautiful third row seat that is super comfortable. Well, here, it's not exactly super comfortable. And on top of that, the storage behind it is not exactly large, and the load floor is super high because the seats kind of stick up, and you have the shelf. I don't know what was going on with the shelf, and I feel like most people that will go from a previous Sequoia to this one will take that shelf, throw it, and just use it as it is. So why do we have the shelf to begin with? And the last thing, and it's not just this, it's every car in 24, 25, the price. $83,000 this beauty cost. That's a lot of money. But the problem is when you start getting into these prices, folks anticipate the quality to be top notch. And while this has a lot of good Toyota quality stuff, but the interior feels still plasticky, the fit finish is not really great, knobs feel cheap, things just don't feel special enough for a car that costs this much. That's why nobody complained about the blob of plastic of an interior of the previous Sequoia, because they didn't cost this much. This cost a lot, and when things cost a lot, folks start to have higher expectations, and that's where the problem is. The TRD Pro Sequoia. So I am really divided on this model, and I feel like we're going to break it down into two things, good and bad. Let's talk about the Sequoia part first. I really like the new update on the Sequoia for the most part. I like that the interior became a usable space that doesn't feel like it's just a blob of plastic there just to fill up the space, because that's how the previous Sequoia was. It was not aesthetically pleasing to look at. It was very outdated. I mean, the Tundra was okay because it was a truck. This is a family SUV, and it just didn't do that very well. This one, though, it doesn't go over the top, which is nice. It's not super gimmicky. It does have a few things here and there, but infotainment is nice. Screen on the gauge, depends how you look at it, but I can live with that. But all the core features remain push button, and they're simple to operate, and they're nicely laid out, plenty of storage, very functional interior, and I love it. The most important thing is it's very comfortable, at least in the first and second row seat, which brings us to the compromise. The biggest compromise in this is the third row seat. I really have problems with that third row seat because of the placement of the battery, had to raise the floor, and I get it, there was no way around it, but they could have done something. Because that third row seat is a big compromise, and it's a giant downgrade from the previous generation. And on top of that, you look all the way at the back at these shelves, they're just, I feel like they completely missed the mark on who is the Sequoia buyer or owner. They want space. More shelving in the way. Yeah, it's nice when you need it at one time, but we want space. And all the shelvings do is just stand in your way until you remove them, and then it's like, what's the whole point? That is the question mark. And the other thing is, which is something can be said about any car in 2024 or 2025, the prices. This, as tested, is just under $83,000. That's a lot of money, folks. Now we're entering into Land Cruiser territory, like the big Land Cruiser territory. But the interior quality could be better. Plasticky, and the gaps are not right, and things are just not executed very well. Now, if this was a $65,000 truck, nobody would have complained, because the price reflects it, and that's how nobody complained about the previous one being basically a blob of plastic, because it was cheaper. This is a lot more expensive, and that's a problem, which leads us to the TRD Pro part. Let's talk about the TRD Pro part, because there's a lot of good stuff and there's a few questionable things. The first thing is, this is not like the Tacoma, which was the biggest TRD Pro disappointment, at least for me, in 2024. This rides nice. It is smooth. You don't have to compromise the ride quality and the interior comfort and everything else. You do have decent options, which is nice. On the flip side, though, this is the off-road model. And the ground clearance, it's not the top. It's actually the lowest among the TRD Pro models. It's less than the Tacoma and the Tundra. And that is a problem. It's not the end of the world problem, but I thought that was the whole point. If we could do the Tundra at 11.5, why isn't this one? So that is a slight thing that you want to think about going into this. On the upside, though, when you compare this to the Tundra, they're similar, this has a shorter wheelbase. So off-roading in that case would be better. And this is an enclosed SUV that you can carry a lot of people, except the ones in the back, otherwise comfortably off-roading, which is pretty cool. The powertrain on this Sequoia, now we have the famous or infamous V35A. I actually think it's very refined of a powertrain. I hope they've resolved their issues and whatnot, but it has a lot of torque. It's very lively. The V8 was lively as well, but it did have its moments where it felt lazy. This is always lively, and adding the hybrid system there does help. However, there is one thing about that, because when you hear the words Toyota hybrid, you're used to 30 plus miles per gallon. Not even close on this one. This hybrid system feels like it's more of an assist than it is for efficiency. So yes, this does get a lot better gas mileage than the Sequoia prior, but it is not going to put impressive numbers. So just keep that in mind going into one. That hybrid system is to assist. Yes, it's going to help with efficiency a little bit, but don't expect 25 plus miles per gallon all day long. That's simply not going to happen. Just heads up on that. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.